Hello and welcome. This is a podcast explaining Ukraine by UkraineWorld.org, a website in English about Ukraine. We continue our podcast about the war which Russia started against Ukraine. This series is brought to you by Internews Ukraine and Ukraine Crisis Media Center, two Ukrainian media NGOs. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I'm chief editor of UkraineWorld.org. We're making this podcast with Tetyana Ogarkova, who is in charge of international outreach at Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Hello, Tanya.
Hello.
Before we start, let me remind you that you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/UkraineWorld. So today we are going to talk about what does it mean to live under Russian occupation. We are visiting regular villages around Kiev and talking to people, bringing them humanitarian aid, talking to people, trying to hear their stories.
Mm-hmm.
What was going on primarily in March. We visited recently, today we visited a village called Bobryk in Kyiv Oblast. Last week we visited villages called Ploske, Velyka Dymerka and others. So what are your impressions, maybe the major impressions?
Let's situate geographically these villages because a lot of people know about Bucha, Irpin, Hostomel. So these are popular names, and our audience, we are absolutely sure you know about, and we also recorded podcasts about Bucha many times. But what we are trying to do now, we are trying to visit villages which are situated on the other side of Kiev, on the eastern side of Kiev. So there were Russian troops approaching Kiev, but not from the north, not from Belarusian border, but from the Russian border, from Sumy. And imagine they were lucky enough to cross many hundreds kilometers before they arrived in Kyiv Oblast, in Kyiv region, in the beginning of March. And they were stopped right before Brovary. So we were able to see with our own eyes that they were stopped, I don't know exactly, maybe 3-4 kilometers from Brovary. At least we can see a lot of destruction, maybe artillery destruction, in 3-4 kilometers from the place we live. And we were able to see at 10 kilometers from our town, Brovary, the presence of Russian tanks. So it means it was another direction of attack, and they were successfully stopped in the end of March. So and they left Kyiv region at the same time as troops left from Bucha and Irpin. This is an important thing to understand. And these villages we are talking here today, they are not largely discussed in podcasts, in media, because they are not very much known, and because there were no such huge number of human victims. Because, for example, if you compare what was happening in Bucha, and we were talking about hundreds and even more than thousands of people killed from different ways. In these villages, we are talking about several dozens of people killed.
In each of them? In each of the villages?
In each of them, yeah. So if in Bucha, we are talking today about 400 something in Bucha itself, and more than 1,000 in Bucha's region. So but you cannot compare. Bucha is 50,000 people population, and if we talk about, I don't know, about Velyka Dymerka, it's about maybe 10,000. If Ploske, it's about 3,000, sorry. And if you talk about Bobryk, it's 2,000 something. So they are small villages. And in our region, in Brovary region, we have 27, if I'm not mistaken, villages who lived under occupation. So this is huge. And so your question was about impressions. So maybe the main impression when you enter the area is that it is also about quite massive destruction. So what you see, even now, 1 month later, you see this massive destruction. You see houses in ruins. You see sometimes still Russian tanks, and we do remember these videos recorded in March, in beginning of April, where there are a lot of tanks close to Brovary, dozens of tanks, because there were major battles there they are no more there, these tanks. But major destruction, not only houses, but all kind of fences, all kind of, I don't know, shops, all kind of stations, all kind of railway. Also, you cross, when you travel in this region, you regularly cross railway. And each time we were able to see that this railway cross, there were massive destruction around. Maybe they were trying to destroy railway for supplies or whatever. So these are places where people really need support, and it's important to say that we were there with a kind of humanitarian mission, because we contacted administration in Brovary, and we suggested that we have a car and we can transport some kind of humanitarian aid, and we were quite surprised that people, they really need help, and they were able to collect quite a lot of humanitarian aid, but they have no people to transport it directly to families, to villages. So what we were trying to do already twice, and we do hope to continue, we were transporting these humanitarian packages. And last week we were even able to transport it to each house and to talk to people. So the life under occupation.
What is important to note is that the war is not about, like, in these places, it's not about like total destruction. It doesn't mean that if in a certain villages the Russians were staying, if there was an artillery fire, it doesn't mean that everything is destroyed.
Sure.
And then the question is, what is destroyed or what is not destroyed? And this is really a matter of chance. So the war is really a matter of chance. Some people were lucky. For example, even in Bucha, we have our friends, and when you see these horrible images, you have the impression that Bucha is totally destroyed. It is not. There are majority of buildings are there, and some of the buildings are not touched in any way by the shelling. The same impression we have in these villages, although there are some quarters, some districts of these villages where everything is destroyed. You rightly mentioned, very often they are close to the railway or they are close to the highway, because on this highway, beautiful highway, which was renovated just before the war, and this is another paradoxical stories. And then tanks were going, the Russian tanks, and there was a huge tank battle. So this is the first conclusion, that it is like a Russian roulette. So you can live in a village, and the house of your neighbor is destroyed and your neighbor is killed, but you are not, for example, and or vice versa.
Yeah,
right?
and let's not forget that about the time the Russian troops occupied these villages, because here we are talking about 3 weeks of occupation. In Bucha, Irpin, Gostomel, we are talking about 4 weeks of destruction, of occupation. So, but we can easily imagine what is happening if we talk about 2 months of occupation, like in the east. So, and with real severe battles. So. This is not the Russian roulette. This is just a different situation, because in many towns and cities in the east, I don't know, up to 90% of buildings, like for example in Popasno and Rubizhne, authorities are talking about up to 90% of buildings touched, and many of them destroyed. I mean, there is no possibility for renovation after the war. So it means you have to destroy it and to rebuild something new in its place. So this is different. So, but I was impressed, really, personally. I was trying to imagine this, just in a short period of 2-3 weeks, they were able to destroy so many things. And when you visit these villages, you see people who spend their lives, and maybe the lives of several generations, to construct these houses, because there are a lot of beautiful houses, and they put a lot of work, a lot of love into places they live, and then Russian army comes and destroys it in only a couple of weeks. This is something incredible. You cannot imagine that.
Mainly, even sometimes we heard the story that a shell entered the house in the evening and destroyed like the quarter of the house or half of the house. Then the family went down to the basement, and then the shell, went into the basement in the first floor. So it's like in a matter of days. The second thing is that how Ukrainian, because these are the villages near Kiev. People are not very rich, but not very poor. In these villages, there are rich houses. There are really peasant houses in which people are really these industrious Ukrainian people who are building for years, for decades, their houses with their own hands. This is very important to remember. It's not that they like inherited this house from grandmothers and grandfathers. Most probably they have been building these houses themselves, and for 30 years, for 40 years, and they lost it like in just a moment. But these villages, for example, what shocked Russian soldiers, some of them, because we understand that Russian soldiers who came here and with whom the Ukrainians peasants we talked to had contact, many of them are coming from very poor regions in Russia. For example, the Buryats, this has become a meme, the Buryats, which have nothing to do with Russian ethnicity or Slavic ethnicity, which have
But
nothing.
they have Russian passports.
Yes, which have nothing to do with Orthodoxy because they are Buddhists, and quite often they are poor, and they are really shocked with several facts. For example, that in Ukrainian villages there are pavements and there is asphalt. Right? How to say it? I don't know in English.
A real road.
So the roads are there, right? The paved roads. In those villages where they come from in Russia, there are not such a thing. Another surprise for them is that there are toilets in the houses and the bathrooms and the shower, and this is a really cultural shock for many of them, because we heard lots about these stories in the media. And of course, in the media, you can doubt, whether this is true or not, whether it's also kind of propaganda, exaggeration from Ukrainian side as well. But now we talk to real people who were under the occupation today, and they confirm this.
And it's also important to underline the difference between Bucha, Irpin, and Gostomel and the region we were visiting. Because if in Bucha, Irpin, and Gostomel, there were mainly what we call middle class people were living. In private houses, quite often, but it was a kind of private houses without land. I don't know. This was not about agriculture and not about your own land. It was about you. For example, you work in Kiev, and daily you travel from Bucha or Irpin to Kiev, and then you travel back, or to school, whatever. So, and you live outside of the city, of the capital, but your main activity is in the capital. So what was different here in villages close to Brovary? There are people, real peasants. I mean, in a way, they are people living. We are not talking about middle class. We are talking about very simple people. And even them, they were really astonished by this attitude of Russians towards these roads and towards toilets. And these are not, I don't know, bourgeois people. They were normal Ukrainian peasants living correctly. I mean, not very poor, not very rich, but they were still astonished to see such an attitude to their lives. And some people were saying that Russian officers even were intrigued, and just show me how do you live. So, and they were impressed. They were really impressed by the way Ukrainians live. So we can understand that this difference is a kind of a clash of civilization, and the attitudes to what is a housing, what is I don't know, what is your property is quite different, because people showed us pictures. Some recorded videos from, for example, the first day of after the occupation. And we were also shocked to see what kind of mess these soldiers were creating inside these houses. I mean, they were living themselves in these houses, so it was in their own interest to just to live correctly, but they were making such a kind of mess. Everything was dirty, they just breaking things for nothing. They were sometimes shooting at the ceiling, whatever. So, and we have an impression that this is a kind of a common picture because people were talking about that in Bucha and also in these villages. So it's a kind of a common behavior. So their attitude towards, I don't know, towards beauty, towards comfort in your own house. So it was, we do understand it was about war, but there is no reason, I don't know, to create such a horrible mess in the house.
They created disorder even in the situations where there is no need. So the things were just lying on the floor. The furniture was sometimes destroyed.
Like kids when parents are not at home.
Yeah, exactly.
Something like that.
But worse than kids, because there are lots of stories then the Russian soldiers are going to toilets. How to say it? Doing what people do in toilets, but not in toilets, but in the apartments,
inside the rooms.
Inside the rooms. And for example, the story we've heard today is that we were in the village council, which is the body which governs this village of 2,500 people, and the Russians, or some of the Russians, were stationed there. This is a small house, 2-floor house, quite small, and they were really doing the toilets inside this
the big room,
inside the big room of the building. So not outside. Oh, okay, you can say, okay, in the real toilets there could be no electricity, no running water, so you better not go there, but this is a village. You can go outside. You can go to the field or whatever.
Maybe they were afraid of shelling, something like that.
Yeah, maybe. But this story we hear day after day, and this is really repeating story. So people are defecating. I don't know how it's called correctly, right? Inside the rooms, inside the apartments.
And this is not an invention. Really, we've had this story in Bucha as well, and also here. And this is kind of surprising, because they were living themselves inside. So we can imagine this is not so very much comfortable for them. So it's something which is shocking in a way. And I imagine people coming back after the occupation and finding their houses in such a state. This is not. There is no reason for such a behavior, but still it's there.
The one more thing is that the looting, right? Looting. Many apartments have been robbed. And that's what we hear in the interceptions of what done by the Ukrainians, interceptions when there are phone calls between Russian soldiers. And we hear that also confirmed by the witnesses that, of course, the shops have been looted, robbed, but also the houses. People entered the houses, the Russian soldiers entered the houses, search for gold, search for some precious metals, search for money, of course, sometimes shoot at some things just without any reason, probably under being under alcohol or maybe under drugs, we don't know. By the way, also there are testimonies that they have been asking for drugs, for marijuana or for some other drugs. So most probably they wanted to use it while staying here.
Another thing to understand why they were doing that is that most of people in most of places we visited and we talked to people, they left their homes before or in the first stage when Russians arrived. So if we talk about Bucha, as we already discussed it, from 50,000 of people, only, I don't know, up from 3,000 to 3,000 were in place when Russians were there. If we talk about these villages we visited today or last week, from, for example, a village of 3,000 people, only several hundred were in place. So the vast majority of people left, so the houses were empty. So they were closed, they were empty, and in a way it was a kind of invitation for Russian soldiers to enter, so they felt free really to enter and to search for what they wanted, in fact. So, and they were able, we imagine, to choose the apartment, to choose the house to live, and maybe better places, better houses were for offices, and I just know normal houses were for other soldiers. So, and they really felt free to search for what they wanted, to do whatever they wanted, and just to be as at home.
Yes, and they looted a lot. So the memes that we're discussing, that they have been massively looting the washing machines and putting on their, well, washing machine. We did it several times in our lives. To transport with your hands a washing machine, you have to be a really strong man. It's like 40 kilograms, 50 kilograms, right? So they were really looting them and putting there on their tanks, whatever. But also the lesser things, the less important things.
Now there is a different version why they were doing so. Now the people are discussing that in Russian weapons now they're using some details from washing machines, some electronic details. I don't know which exactly, chips, something like that, and that's why they were trying to steal all the washing machines from the very beginning. But what was reporting from the very beginning of the war that they already were doing that. So maybe it's linked to sanctions. I don't know, to all this technology, that they don't have this technology for their weapons, so they're trying to use those from washing machines. I don't know if it is a kind of
Interesting.
inventions.
Maybe this, but all there are all other things like people that they are looting clothes, they are looting, you know, some things, the computers, the laptops, the etc. So this is also the science. Another thing which is important is that today people in Bobryk were telling us that many of those soldiers are very young. Actually, very young. They just called me, okay, they were kids, as if they were kids in the uniform. And these kids, of course, imagine a person in 20-year guy, 20, 21-year guy, who didn't see the world, didn't see life yet, or some of them who were 24, 25, they already were doing the war since they were 19 in Donbass. So imagine those people, disoriented, of course, with little understanding of what their values are. They're coming to a foreign country without real reason, without real understanding what they are doing here. And here, interesting, there are conversations between these Ukrainian peasants and them. Like, these peasants are asking, what the hell are you doing here? And either there is no answer, so these soldiers just say, we don't understand, we don't know, we were just sent by our leadership. Or there is a typical answer by the Russian propaganda that we came here to liberate you from Nazism and we will take Kiev in 2 days. So we've heard that they were telling that the commanders were coming to them and saying, look, in this direction there is Kiev, and there are fascists who are living there, so our goal is to go there. And by the way, some of them planned to stay here. So they were thinking, okay, we will come here, we will take Ukraine in 2 days, and we'll stay here in this. We will exterminate the Nazis, or they will leave, and we will live in beautiful Kiev apartments. That they were kind of a
This kind of intellectual level of these people. Yes, indeed, the people were talking a lot about these young soldiers, and what was official information from the very beginning of the war, that a lot of people were kontraktniki. Kontraktniki, it means that the people who are just doing their military service, so they are 18 or maybe 19 years old only. So quite young.
No, you mean not
Контрактники,
контрактники, призывники.
Срочники.
Срочники.
I'm sorry, срочники.
So
Срочники,
conscripted, the conscripted.
people who are making. So they were young people. And another thing that people were talking about, telling us these stories, that there were different nationalities. So Russians, also Buryats, a lot of Buryats. They were talking also about Chechens, maybe most present in Bucha, Irpin, and also about people from Belarus. So a kind of mixture of different people.
And Belarusians, not the members of the Belarusian army, but Belarusians who decided to make a contract with the Russian army.
Yeah,
Why?
sure.
Because Russians are paying better. So we have these ethnic Belarusians, probably with Belarusian passports, who joined the Russian army.
So this is so a kind of mixture of different people from different cultures, from different attitudes, and but maybe the same goal. But what you already mentioned, that not most of them were just unaware of what they are exactly doing here. They were unable to respond to a simple question: what the fuck you are doing here? What is your goal here? Because when they were starting to talk about liberation, people were mocking at them, saying, "What kind of liberation are you talking about? We live very well here. We don't need you. We don't need any kind of liberation." And they had simply no arguments. I mean, if you talk about peasants and about all these simple people in villages, they were not afraid, at least some of them, to ask openly these kids, as they call them, what are you doing here? And they got no clear answer. And another thing is that there were many different groups, many different nationalities, and many different groups in many different villages, quite close. I don't know, 5 or 10 kilometers one from another. And they were afraid one of each of other, in fact. So people reported that they were afraid of, for example, another troop staying in a different village.
So there is a mistrust between
Mistrust,
different garrisons, or how to call it, different parts.
Divisions.
Not divisions maybe, but different groups of Russian soldiers. That's interesting. But coming back to this question that you mentioned, this we talked today with the head of the Bobryk village, who is a man who is called Mykola Grigorovich, who is a typical I would say Ukrainian peasant, and he stayed. He didn't leave his village, and he was risking his life. Actually, he does not presenting it, but we know the stories when the heads of the villages were killed and were tortured. In Moshun, for example, this is a very famous story, but also in some other villages as well, and he was indeed under threat because initially they just took him, closed his eyes, and were leading him somewhere and talking between the Russian soldiers, were talking between themselves. Okay, why do we need to bother with him? Let's just shoot him. And he was hearing all that. So I think this was a tactic.
And I imagine his wife, who left in the house, she saw him living with Russian soldiers, and she was without news for many hours.
Yes, and the important thing is that he didn't live here. As he presents it to us, that my wife told me that I will never go. I will not go without you, and he told that I will not go without my village. So they stayed, and he even kind of tried to negotiate with them on the evacuation corridors. And when people died, he was organizing the burials, because people died of shelling, etc. So the Russian commander, entered his house, entered his territory, and saw 3 cars. So this is the head of this village has, and we have seen them, quite a nice Volkswagen minivan, and then another car which is a car of the village, and then the car of his daughter. So people are living okay. This is not very rich village. People are having cars, people are having tractors. We also hear the news that some of the Russian soldiers were surprised that the Ukrainians have tractors because they were asking, okay, where are your horses?
And this man, he worked with tractors for all his life before being elected. And another thing that Russians didn't understand is that this head of the village, it is a kind of elected position. So, and he made a joke that they called me everything. They called me governor, I don't know, maybe president as well. They just didn't understand what kind of position is it. So head of the village, that he's a simple tractor. He's, I don't know how. He was working his land, but then he was elected the head of the village. So he has more responsibilities, more possibilities as well. But he's somebody from the village.
And in Ukrainian, we call it starosta,
Starosta.
meaning that this is an old name, and which is coming from this idea of being old, wise, and respected. So yeah, this is also a symbol of Ukrainian decentralized society right now, where people are electing their head, their starosta, and where people are electing their mayors, and where everything is kind of this very autonomous, and these villages can be very mistrustful to any kind of central government, you know.
And I was personally very much impressed by his response to our questions. Why didn't you leave the village? He said that my people would never forgive me if I left them alone here.
He said, I couldn't look at their eyes.
Something like that. So, and he was talking about not about thousands, but about hundreds of people who stayed, because as we explained before, most of people left, and he organized corridors. He stayed to organize corridors for people who wanted to leave. I mean, I don't know, women with kids or anybody, but he stayed, and he had to. He did this duty job to negotiate with Russians. And he did it professionally in a way, because he was also negotiating for bread. He mentioned that, for example, for food coming into village. So he came to this Russian officer saying, "Look, we need a corridor because there is a car which will bring bread into our village." And officer responded, "Okay, we'll organize that." By the way, he mentioned that he had this kind of contact with this Kinjal, what was his name, kind of, I don't know what kind of officer was
Commander,
it?
yes, Russian commander.
Something like commander. And for example, for burials as well, he was free to move in the village, for example, when he knew that somebody is dead. And he had to go there and to help to transport this body to the cemetery or whatever. He was asking, so he was free to move into the village. So this kind of difficult.
An important also element that what we understood in Bucha and what we understood here in Bobryk. In Bucha, as we mentioned, 412, I think, people died, at least according to preliminary estimations, 400 people. In Bobryk, 10 people died, and most of them because of the shelling.
Six out of 10.
Yeah, yes. So we don't really have many people who were killed by bullets. In Bucha, most of the people were killed by bullets. There were tortures, there were rapes, everything horrible, and the corpses were living on the streets. We didn't have this in these villages. One of the explanations why is that here, and the starosta was telling us the stories, that commanders were more or less okay, and there were even Russian commanders, and they were even trying to persecute those soldiers who were looting houses. And that leads me to a conclusion that it is really uneven in the Russian army, and it really depends on the commander and on a discipline. So Bucha massacre could have been explained either by real orders who are coming from the commanders. You have to exterminate all the brutes, you have to torture them, this is one of the explanation, legitimate one. Another explanation is that everything just went out of order. The commanders were the same bastards as soldiers, or they didn't control their soldiers, and etc. I think the two explanations can be.
I would suggest another argument, maybe on the contrary. Look, if you compare Bucha with 50,000 people and Bobryk with 2,000 people, so it's 25 times higher population in Bucha. If you made just a calculation, so 10, you should multiply this 10 victims by 25 times, you would have 250 victims.
Yes,
it is
but
comparable.
my argument is that in Bucha most people were killed by bullets, by specific shooting, or by torture. That's the difference. Not by shelling occasional when you're in your apartment and or in your house. This is very important because the big part of this war is artillery war. But then next you are asking, okay, if you're face to face Russian soldier and a peasant or a dweller, what's happening? Either they're trying to accommodate, they're saying, okay, come down, we won't do anything bad for you if you do not protest, if you are quiet, we don't do anything. This is one of the tactics. Another tactics is that they're really saying, okay, you are all Nazi and we will kill you, everybody. So we see different tactics, we see different realities.
I would argue that maybe there is no very much differences, because another difference is in Bucha they stayed for the whole month and they entered Bucha in the end of February. When these other troops arrived in the Brovary region, it was already 10th March, something like that, 8th, 9th, 10th March, so it's different schedule, They were not arriving with this kind of intense combats. They were not living these losses. I mean, military losses, at least from what was reported in this particular village. So I don't really think it's kind of a huge, difference between the attitudes. I think it's Russian roulette. So they may be better commanders and maybe pure chance, a small village, not a lot of military inside. And no a lot of conflicts, because also the head of the village made everything possible. I mean, he was not collaborating. For example, how he was explained. For example, the second day, Russians come up and say, look, there is no electricity, you have to repair the electricity. So he checks and he replied that, look, there is no possibility to repair anything because there is no electricity in the whole region. So our supplies just will not function. And Russian response is that, look, we need electricity, so you do that. Otherwise, I will shoot at your leg. And the response of this man is, okay, you can shoot at me, but electricity will be not here, even if you do that. So he was trying to just to show that their argument, this violence, was senseless. Because even if you kill people, there will be no electricity. Another example, the third day, they arrived asking to help them to construct a bridge, because there was a river and they needed a bridge. And the response of the head was, I cannot construct a bridge because I don't have, I don't know what...
the equipment for
equipment. And the response was, okay, I will shoot at you and you'll... And he replies, so even if you shoot at me, you will not have this. I will not be able to
it will not appear magically.
So these kind of arguments that everything can be got by violence, he was just making their arguments in a quite an intelligent way. So, but he kept contact. He was not collaborating, but he kept contact for his own objectives, to help people, to bring bread, to make evacuation. For example, there was a story of an African, if I'm not mistaken, African living in the village, married to a Ukrainian woman. Ukrainian. Living for... not even speaking Ukrainian, if I'm not mistaken. They used to live in Germany, but then they moved here. A woman from this village, this man, we don't know exactly his citizenship. Maybe he was German, but from and the kids. And Russian soldiers, they wounded this man, and he needed surgery. So this head of the village had to go to Russians and ask them to organize, or to let him organize a kind of humanitarian corridor for him to be able to transport them to Brovary. Some 15 kilometers, maybe 20 kilometers to Brovary, to the hospital. And they agreed. So by this, I don't know, these modest objectives, he was trying to survive and to make survive his
And this story
population.
also testifies this question. It is sometimes discussed all over the world about the Ukrainian racism or whatever. Of course, I mean, racism is everywhere and there are different people. But this particular case shows us two things. First, in a quite not very rich Ukrainian village, an African Ukrainian was living with his wife and children.
With their kids.
And children, and she brought him from Germany, and they were okay. That means that, well, their life was okay, and the people in the village, our hypothesis is, were having a normal relations with them. And the second is that when this man is wounded, the starosta, maybe by risking also his life, organizes his evacuation and asks Russian soldiers to guarantee that he's moved to the hospital to Brovary. This is interesting example. Another thing is that we saw a smashed car, which is just turned into the rubbish of steel. We have seen lots of them in Bucha, in Hostomel. In our episode about, which is called Bucha Stories, we have been telling you about this, the so-called car cemeteries. We do have confirmation in this region, and this is also a kind of a repetitive thing, is that civilian cars were shelled and shot, and there are cases that a family is trying to leave, to escape, and then the Russian tanks or Russian's army is approaching, and they just shell the car, and everybody's dead, or some are dead, some are wounded. But a story that we've heard, that a person from another village, and if I'm not mistaken, also a starosta, was going to this Bobryk on his car, and then there is this Russian tanks which started just shelling at his car. He jumped off the car and fell on the ground, and then this tank just went over the car. Yeah. And this is something I don't understand. Okay, you're shelling the civilians, thinking that probably they are Nazis or they're whatever else, even if there are women and kids in the car. But then you are in the tank, and then this person just moved away, and you're in the tank, and we see this repetitive stories like that. Why would you drive over the car? You can say, okay, in this part of the road, the road was actually very narrow, so maybe this tank was not having any opportunity to kind of pass by. But we have seen these examples on the wide roads, even in Kiev. Remember, in the first days when the Russian tanks was on Obolon, when there is no Russian tank army, there is a sole alone tank, and then driving over the car with the person inside the car. I mean, what is it? How you explain it?
Even now, I've seen just a video maybe 10 minutes ago, maybe 1 hour ago, about Mariupol. And it's happening now in this destroyed, ruined city. So what you see on this video, you see a tank and some voices, and somebody is filming, and there is some abandoned cars which are still more or less okay. And this Russian tank is moving in the nearby, and it's smashing these cars, and also cutting trees. I don't know, destroying trees around.
So they're just making fun out of the destruction.
It is making fun out of destruction, indeed. So for them it's funny. So look, I am in a tank, so I'm very strong. I can destroy everything on my way, regardless what is it exactly. So could be civilians, cars, trees, playgrounds, and these guys go to the playground. I don't know, a normal playground in a normal, close to a normal building in Mariupol. So and they're doing that just for fun. Maybe it's because they're kind of teenagers. I don't know.
Maybe, yes, maybe. But this is kind of a culture of violence, which is really shocking. We knew that there is this cult of violence in Russia, but we didn't know that it is so horrible.
This is so real. I mean, this is not about ideas. This is not about art. This is not about, I don't know, something abstract. It's about absolutely real behaviors when they are destroying just to destroy. And when they, for example, shouting at the ceiling in the house they are living inside. So it is about destruction for destruction.
Yes, so this is. I think we will end on this, and we will tell you more stories out of our trips, which we hope to do regularly. So we will try to balance the analysis and stories, and you also noticed. We hope that we try to give a lot of background about Ukrainian history and culture. We have a separate cycle about this. This was a Explaining Ukraine podcast. This series is brought to you by Internews Ukraine and Ukraine Crisis Media Center. This series about the war. Tetyana Ogarkova from Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Myself, Volodymyr Yermolenko, Chief Editor of UkraineWorld.org. You can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/UkraineWorld. Listen to our podcasts at SoundCloud, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, anywhere else. And stay with us, support us, and stand with